The dust of forgotten arguments was Dr. Alistair Finch's preferred sacrament. He lived in a world of brittle parchment and catalogued skepticism, a self-imposed exile in the quiet crypts of academia. 10 years had passed since the Holy See had cast him out, stripping him of his collar and branding him with the sin of failure. 10 years since a girl named Liliana had died under his hands, her small body convulsing not with a demon, but with a brain aneurysm the church's assessors conveniently overlooked. His faith had not survived the autopsy. Now he debunked ghosts for tenure and lectured on the semiotics of forgotten heresies. His intellect, once a tool for understanding God, had been reforged into a scalpel for dissecting superstition. It was a sharp, effective weapon, and it kept the ghosts of his past at a tolerable distance. Until the ghost of the Vatican appeared at his office door. Cardinal Valerius was a man carved from old marble and older power, his crimson cassock a splash of blood against the beige monotony of the history department. He did not waste time with pleasantries. They had none to share. He placed a heavy vellum envelope on Alistair's desk, the wax seal of the Congregatio Pro Doctrina Fide unbroken, the very office that had excommunicated him. "We did not always agree, Dr. Finch," Valerius said, his voice a dry rustle of silk. "But your particular expertise was once valued. It is required again." Alistair didn't touch the envelope. "I'm a historian, Cardinal. I trade in facts, not phantoms. The Church has its own sanctioned monster hunters. I am no longer among them." "The men we sent have not reported back," Valerius stated, the admission costing him a visible effort. "This is not a request from the congregation. It is a plea from an old friend." He nudged the envelope forward. It was addressed in the spidery, frantic hand of Father Michael, the only man who had spoken in Alistair's defense during his trial. His mentor, his friend. With a sigh that felt like it came from a deeper, more weary part of his soul, Alistair broke the seal. The letter was a chaotic scrawl, words tumbling over each other in a desperate torrent. "Alistair, my boy, you must come. They don't understand. It's not in the books they read. It's in the bones of the place. A sickness of stone and soul. It whispers. It knows our regrets. It wears our faith like a shroud and hollows it out from the inside. They think it's a blessing, a forgotten power, but it's older than the sorrowful martyr himself. It's a hunger that has woken up. It speaks her name, Alistair, in the echoes. It speaks Liliana's name. The last two words were a gut punch, a cold spike of ice hammered directly into his heart. Liliana. The name was a key, unlocking a room in his memory he kept barricaded shut. He looked up, his face a mask of controlled fury. Where is he? The Basilica of the Sorrowful Martyr, a remote diocese in Cantabria, Valerius said. He is the acting caretaker, or was. We lost contact 3 days ago. Alistair stood, the letter clenched in his fist. I'm not doing this for you, or for the Church. I'm doing it for him. Your motives are your own, the Cardinal replied, a flicker of relief in his obsidian eyes. Your methods, however, try not to burn this cathedral down as well. The jab was meant to sting, but Alistair was already gone, walking back into the world of shadows he had sworn to abandon. The Basilica of the Sorrowful Martyr did not rise from the Spanish hills so much as it sagged under the weight of a perpetually weeping sky. It was a Gothic behemoth of gray, lichen-scarred stone, spearing the low-hanging fog with skeletal spires. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and cold rock, and a silence so profound it felt like a presence. Alistair felt the building's malevolence the moment he stepped from the hired car. It wasn't a spiritual feeling. His capacity for that had been cauterized. It was architectural. The flying buttresses were like the exposed ribs of a fossilized leviathan, the towering stained glass windows like multifaceted, unblinking eyes, and the silence. It wasn't empty. It was listening. He was met at the gargantuan oak doors by a young monk whose smile was as brilliant as it was unnerving. "Dr. Finch, I am Brother Lorenzo. It is an honor. We have been praying for guidance, and the Lord, in his wisdom, sends a historian." There was a subtle mockery in his tone. Lorenzo was handsome, his dark hair tonsured in the traditional style, but his eyes held a fervent, almost predatory gleam. He was a zealot. Alistair knew the type instantly. All fire, no hearth. "I'm here to find Father Michael," Alistair said, his voice flat. "Of course, our beloved Father Michael," Lorenzo said, his smile tightening. "He has not been himself. He speaks of whispers in the walls, of a sickness. We fear his age and his solitude have laid a heavy burden on his mind." He led Alistair into the nave, and the sheer scale of the place threatened to swallow him. Pillars like ancient redwoods soared into a gloom that daylight could not pierce. The air was glacial, and Alistair's footsteps echoed unnaturally, the sound stretching and distorting as it traveled down the cavernous hall. He remembered Michael's notes on the basilica's unique acoustics, a quirk of its construction that could carry a whisper from the narthex to the altar, a perfect vessel for a murmuring plague. A young woman in a simple nun's habit emerged from the shadows of a side chapel. She clutched a leather-bound book to her chest, her eyes wide and nervous. "This is Sister Elena," Lorenzo said, "our archivist. She was assisting Father Michael with his research. Perhaps she can assist you as well. Sister, see to Dr. Finch's needs. I must prepare for Vespers." He gave Alistair a nod that was both a welcome and a warning, then disappeared into the cloister. "Dr. Finch," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so glad you're here. Father Michael, he was so frightened." "What was he researching?" Alistair asked, his gaze sweeping the oppressive grandeur around them. "The foundations. The history before the basilica was built. He found mention of a pre-Christian shrine, a place of binding. He said the church wasn't built to glorify God, but to act as a cage." She shivered, pulling her shawl tighter. "He became obsessed with the ossuary and the lower crypts. He said the whispers were loudest there. She seemed genuine, a frightened young woman caught in something she didn't understand. A perfect guide." "Show me his rooms," Alistair commanded. Michael's cell was a study in organized chaos. Books on Gnosticism, pre-Roman Iberian paganism, and acoustical engineering lay splayed open. Charts of the cathedral's floor plan were pinned to the wall, covered in frantic annotations. One phrase was circled again and again: "Vox inanis," the empty voice. And on his desk, a small silver-framed photograph of Alistair and Michael years ago, smiling outside the Vatican, a relic from a different life. Then he saw it. Tucked beneath a heavy tome on heretical architecture was a charcoal rubbing taken from a stone marker. It was a symbol he didn't recognize, a stylized spiral coiling inwards around a hollow center. And beneath it, scrawled in Michael's hand, Lorenzo's Saint. "Sister Elena," Alistair said, his voice dangerously quiet. "What do you know about Brother Lorenzo's private prayer group?" Elena's face went pale. "They are devout men, zealous. They believe the church has lost its way, that it needs a more profound intervention, a return to primal faith. And what does this primal faith worship?" She wouldn't meet his eyes. "A lost saint, a martyr forgotten by Rome. They call him the Murmuring Saint." A lie. Alistair could smell it. A well-rehearsed, terrified lie, but he let it stand. For now, she was more useful as a flawed guide than a broken witness. "The ossuary," he said. "Take me there." The Chapel of Bones was a monument to morbidity. Skulls and femurs were arranged in macabre geometric patterns, a silent congregation of the dead. The air was thick with the dry, sweet scent of decay and the profound, echoing silence. As Elena waited nervously by the entrance, Alistair walked deeper into the chamber, and the whispers began. They were not just sounds, but feelings scraped along his psyche. They coalesced from the strange acoustics, shaping themselves into the specter of his greatest failure. Failed her. "Alistair, Liliana screamed your name. Your pride killed her, not a demon, just a girl." He squeezed his eyes shut, his hand instinctively going to the empty place on his chest where a crucifix used to hang. It was the entity. Michael was right. It fed on guilt. It metabolized regret into terror. In this place, his soul was a banquet. A shadow detached itself from the far wall. It wasn't a man's shadow. It was too long, too fluid, its edges blurring and reforming like ink in water. It slithered across the bone-lined walls, a patch of absolute blackness that seemed to drink the candlelight. Alistair didn't reach for holy water or a Latin rite. He grabbed a heavy bronze candelabra from a niche and hurled it at a small, high window he'd noticed earlier, a feature designed to ventilate the crypt. The leaded glass shattered with a deafening crash. The sudden, sharp noise, so different from the hushed whispers, caused the acoustic echo to spike into a cacophony. The shadow recoiled as if struck, dissolving back into the ambient gloom. The whispers faltered, drowned out by the ringing in his ears. He strode back to the entrance, his heart hammering against his ribs. Elena stared at him, her face a mask of terror. "It knows me," Alistair said, his voice a low growl. "And it's using your cult to break free." He saw the truth of his accusation shatter her composure. He backed her against the cold stone wall, his face inches from hers. "No more lies, sister. Lorenzo is not worshipping a saint. He is trying to summon and bind whatever is buried under this church. He's using Father Michael, isn't he? As a focus? A sacrifice?" Tears streamed down her face. "Not a sacrifice," she sobbed. "A vessel. The final anchor. Lorenzo says the saint will purify the church, scour it clean with its primal truth. He promised it would bring a new age of faith, but its voice, it's so cold. It only talks about our sins, our secrets. Where is the ritual, and when? Tonight, in the Catacomba Clausa," she whispered, her voice breaking. "The sealed catacomb, beneath the main altar. They're using the old pre-Roman chamber, the place of binding. What texts are they using?" he demanded. "I need to know what he's reading." "The Codex of Whispering Glory," she confessed. "It's not a holy text. It's something else. Lorenzo keeps it hidden." Alistair's mind raced. He had read of the Codex in a suppressed Vatican manuscript. It wasn't a book of summoning. It was a book of symbiosis, detailing how a parasitic, non-corporeal entity could be given physical form by grafting it onto a psychic anchor, a host whose faith had been eroded by guilt. Michael, consumed with worry and self-blame over Alistair's fate, was the perfect candidate. But Alistair also remembered a footnote in that manuscript, a reference to a countertext, a piece of apocrypha so heretical it was ordered to be burned on sight, the Liber de Exnominatione, the Book of Unnaming. It proposed a theological paradox, that a being given power through belief and name could be undone by a ritual of pure, focused disbelief, a sonic and linguistic negation, an exorcism for an atheist. "There's another book in your library, Elena," Alistair said, his voice urgent. a thin volume bound in untreated hide. It will not be catalogued under theology, but under linguistics or philosophy. Find it. Bring it to the bell tower. I have a plan. He turned to leave, but she grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. You can't fight it, Doctor. It's too strong. Lorenzo and the others, their faith makes it real. Good, Alistair said, a grim smile touching his lips. Then my lack of faith will make it unreal. The air in the catacomb was thick and ancient, tasting of stone dust and ozone. Chanting, a low, guttural Latin that perverted the familiar rhythm of the Mass, echoed from a chamber ahead. Alistair moved silently through the narrow passage, the heavy, leather-bound Liber de Exnominatione tucked under his arm. He peered into the central chamber. It was a circular room, far older than the Gothic cathedral above. Crude, spiraling symbols, the same one from Michael's rubbingware carved into the walls. In the center, bound to a rough-hewn stone altar, was Father Michael. He was pale and gaunt, his eyes wide with a terror that was not his own. He was mumbling, but the voice that came from his lips was a layered, discordant whisper that scraped at the edges of hearing. Brother Lorenzo stood before him, arms raised, his face ecstatic. 6 of his followers knelt around him, their heads bowed, their focused devotion a palpable force, a river of psychic energy flowing towards the altar. Sanctus murmurans, exordi nos, Lorenzo cried, his voice ringing with fanatical power. Accipe hoc vas et ambula in carne, accept this vessel and walk in the flesh. The shadows in the room began to writhe. They bled from the corners, coalescing around Father Michael. Shards of stone lifted from the floor, and tiny fragments of colored light flecked with ruby red and cobalt blue seemed to flake away from the very air, remnants of the stained glass windows hundreds of feet above, drawn down through the basilica's spiritual architecture. Alistair knew he had only moments. He burst into the room. Lorenzo, stop this. You don't know what you're summoning. Lorenzo turned, his face a mask of furious bliss. Dr. Finch, the apostate, you are too late. Witness the true salvation. The age of doubt is over. He gestured to 2 of his monks. Remove him. The monks, their eyes glazed with fervor, charged. Alistair was not a fighter, but he was a survivor. He sidestepped the first, using the man's momentum to send him sprawling. He swung the heavy heretical text like a club, catching the second monk squarely in the jaw with a sickening crunch. But it was only a momentary delay. The entity was manifesting. The shadows and stone shards swirled faster and faster around Michael, forming a grotesque chrysalis. A sound emerged, a multi-tonal hum that vibrated in Alistair's bones. It was the sound of a name being learned, of a form being filled. Then, from the entrance to the catacomb, a single clear sound cut through the chanting. The tolling of a great bell. Elena. The first peal of the martyr's tongue, the cathedral's largest bell, was pure and resonant, but the second was wrong. It came too soon, cutting off the first's echo, creating a jarring, dissonant clang that shuddered through the stone. Lorenzo faltered, his concentration breaking. What is that? Alistair held up the Liber de Exnominatione, his voice ringing out, clear and academic, reciting not a prayer, but a complex deconstructionist argument. Ego te ex nomino. I unname you. You are not a saint, but a resonance in empty stone. You are not a spirit, but a parasite of syntax. You are a flaw in the logic of faith, a hollow echo that mistakes itself for a voice. He was shouting the forbidden words of the counter-ritual. Each syllable was a philosophical hammer, blow, amplified by the discordant, ugly peal of the bell from above. The ritual wasn't meant to cast out, but to academically disprove the entity's existence to its face. The coalescing form around Michael shrieked, a sound of 1,000 scratching styluses on slate. The mosaic of stone and shadow and stolen light trembled, its form unstable. It couldn't reconcile the focused belief of the cultists with the focused, weaponized disbelief of Alistair, all carried on the dissonant waves of the bell. "He is blaspheming. Strengthen the circle." Lorenzo screamed, his followers renewing their chanting with desperate intensity. The Murmuring Saint's form solidified. It was a horrifying mockery of a holy icon, 7 feet tall, made of shifting stone shards, solidified shadow, and 1,000 slivers of stained glass that glittered like the compound eyes of an insect. It had no face, only a swirling vortex of darkness where a head should be, from which the whispers of every soul's deepest shame poured forth. It took a step off the altar, detaching from Michael, its own being now tenuously real. It turned its faceless head towards Alistair. "You cannot unmake me, Alistair Finch. Your guilt is my bedrock. Your failure is my gospel." The chamber began to crack. Stones rained down from the ceiling. The entity raised a clawed hand made of sharpened obsidian and shattered faith. Just as it lunged, Elena appeared, her face streaked with grime and tears. She held a heavy iron processional cross, and with a scream of defiant terror, she swung it not at the monster, but at the ancient keystone in the archway above the altar. The impact was jarring. A web of cracks spread from the keystone. With a final desperate heave, she struck it again. The archway groaned, buckled, and collapsed, sending tons of consecrated stone crashing down between Alistair and the monster, burying the altar and severing the entity's connection to its anchor point. The creature roared in. Confusion, its physical form flickering violently. The sonic dissonance of the bell and the theological paradox of the unnaming were now overwhelming its fragile hold on reality. "Nihilus praeter silentium inane," Alistair bellowed the final line of the ritual. "You are nothing but an empty silence." The Murmuring Saint convulsed. Its form imploded, the shards of glass and stone flying inwards, the shadow folding in on itself. It created a vortex of negative presence, a vacuum of faith. Lorenzo and his kneeling followers screamed as the unseen force ripped their devotion, their life, their very souls from their bodies, pulling them into the imploding void. In a blinding flash of utter blackness, the entity and its worshippers were gone. Silence. A true, complete silence descended upon the catacomb. The chamber was collapsing. Alistair rushed to the fallen altar, heaving stones away until he found Michael, unconscious but breathing. He threw his old mentor over his shoulder and staggered towards Elena. "Come on, this whole place is coming down." They scrambled through the crumbling catacombs, the groans of the dying basilica chasing them up into the nave. They burst through the main doors just as a massive stained glass window depicting the sorrowful martyr's final agony shattered inwards, its 1,000 pieces of colored glass raining down into the darkness. They collapsed on the dew-soaked grass, gasping in the clean, cold air. The first hint of gray was touching the eastern sky. The fog was lifting. The basilica of the sorrowful martyr stood silhouetted against the dawn, no longer malevolent, merely a vast and broken tomb of stone. Michael stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He looked at Alistair, a flicker of recognition, of gratitude, in his gaze. Elena was weeping quietly, a sound of grief and profound relief. Alistair looked at the broken church, then at his own hands. They were scraped and bloody, but steady. He hadn't felt a flicker of great, divine presence, no rush of holy righteousness. He had faced an ancient horror, not with a cross, but with a theory. He had fought it, not with faith, but with its absence. He hadn't found God again in the darkness of the basilica. He had found himself. Dr. Alistair Finch, the excommunicated exorcist, the historian of horrors. He was no longer a man running from his ghosts. He was the one who knew their language, who understood their structure, and who would stand against them, not with a prayer, but with a will of iron and a mind as sharp as broken glass. The world had more monsters than the Vatican knew, and they would not be defeated by faith alone,